Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. I woke up to a dimly lit room, the cold stone floor pressing against my back. A dull ache pulsed through my head, clouding my thoughts. My eyes adjusted slowly to the gloom, revealing the bare walls around me. Panic began to rise as I realized I had no memory of how I got here. My heart raced as I struggled to sit up, the unsettling sense of disorientation weighing heavily on me. The room was small, the only light coming from a flickering bulb in the ceiling. The walls were blank, almost sterile, but the faint scent of dampness and decay lingered in the air. I reached out to touch the nearest wall, finding it cold and rough to the touch, like concrete. As I ran my hands over the surface, I noticed no windows or vents, just solid walls enclosing me like a tomb. My breath quickened as I scanned the room for any clues, any sign of an exit. Then, from behind one of the walls, I heard a faint, muffled sound. I froze, straining to listen. It was rhythmic, almost like breathing. I took a step closer, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to locate the source. The sound seemed to come from just behind the wall. I pressed my ear against the cold surface, but the breathing was too faint to make out clearly. I felt a chill run down my spine. The sound was unmistakable. Now someone was breathing on the other side of the wall. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Who was there? How did I end up here, and why? I pounded on the door with both fists, the sound echoing through the room. "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice came out hoarse, and I wasn't sure if it was from fear or the strain of my pounding heart. I paused, hoping for a response, but only silence greeted me. I banged on the door again, harder this time. "Let me out, please." Still no answer. My panic grew, and I began to pound on the door with renewed desperation. My fists ached with each strike, but I couldn't stop. I had to get out of here. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls inching closer with every second. I screamed, shouting until my voice was raw, but the only response was the eerie silence. Breathing heavily, I slumped against the door, exhausted and defeated. I was trapped. My mind spun with fear, trying to make sense of the situation. Why was I here? Who was breathing behind the wall? And why wouldn't they respond? I rubbed my temples, trying to think clearly. That's when I noticed the keyhole at eye level on the door. I had been too frantic to see it before. Cautiously, I leaned forward, pressing my eye against the small opening. I squinted, trying to make out anything on the other side, but it was too dark to see clearly. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw them two terrified eyes staring back at me through the keyhole. I jerked back in shock, my heart leaping into my throat. Whoever was on the other side was just as scared as I was. I hesitated for a moment before leaning in again, my eye meeting theirs once more. We were both trapped, both prisoners in this nightmarish situation. The realization hit me like a wave of cold water. I wasn't alone in this, but that didn't make me feel any safer. I whispered through the keyhole, my voice trembling. "Who are you? What's happening?" The eyes blinked, and for a moment, I thought I saw a tear glisten in the dim light. A soft, shaky voice responded, barely more than a whisper. "I don't know. I woke up here too. I'm scared." A surge of empathy and fear washed over me. Whoever this person was, they were just as helpless as I was. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice firmer now, more determined. The voice on the other side whimpered, "There's no way out. I've tried everything. The walls are solid. The door won't budge. We're trapped." Desperation clawed at me, but I forced myself to stay calm. There has to be something we can do. Think if you've seen anything, heard anything that might help us. The eyes disappeared for a moment, then returned. I heard footsteps earlier, but they stopped. I don't know who they were or what they wanted. I'm so scared. Footsteps. Someone had been here. The thought gave me a strange mix of hope and dread. If someone had been here, they might come back. But would they help us? Or were they the reason we were trapped? I scanned the room again, more carefully this time, looking for anything I might have missed. My gaze fell on a small, almost invisible crack in the wall opposite the door. It was barely noticeable, but it was there. I crawled over to it, running my fingers along the edge. It felt like a door or a panel, something hidden. "I think I found something," I whispered, trying not to get too excited. "There's a crack in the wall, like a hidden door." The eyes widened in the keyhole, and the voice became more urgent. "Can you open it? Maybe that's the way out." I pressed against the crack, pushing with all my might, but the panel didn't budge. Frustration boiled inside me, but I couldn't give up now. I searched the floor, the walls, looking for anything that might help me pry it open. My fingers brushed against a loose tile on the floor. I pried it up, revealing a small, rusty metal tool underneath. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. I jammed the tool into the crack, using it as a lever to pry the panel open. It gave way slowly, creaking as it shifted. My heart raced with hope. Finally, the panel swung open, revealing a narrow passage beyond. I turned to the keyhole, excitement in my voice. I did it. I got it open. The eyes in the keyhole widened in shock and fear. "No, don't go in there. Please don't." I hesitated, the sudden change in tone unnerving me. "Why? What's in there?" But before they could answer, the door to my room creaked open behind me. I spun around, and the last thing I saw was a dark figure looming in the doorway before everything went black once more. Story 2. I always saw my neighbor watching me from his window. Mr. Wilkins lived alone in the small, worn-down house directly across from mine. He was an odd man, always staring, his eyes following my every move. At first, I thought it was harmless, a lonely old man with too much time on his hands. But over time, his staring became more intense, more focused, like he was waiting for something. Every morning when I left for work, there he was, standing behind his lace curtains, barely visible, yet unmistakably there. When I came home, it was the same, his eyes tracking me as I pulled into the driveway, as I unlocked my front door, as I went about my evening. It was unsettling, but I brushed it off. I had a busy life, and the last thing I needed was to get paranoid about a nosy neighbor. Then, one day I noticed something different. As I pulled into my driveway, I glanced over at Mr. Wilkins' house, as I had gotten used to doing, and saw that his usual lace curtains had been replaced. The new curtains were thick, dark, and almost completely opaque. But there was one odd thing, a small, round hole in the center, right at eye level. It was subtle, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. The thought that Mr. Wilkins had deliberately made a peephole sent a chill down my spine. That night, I tried to shake off the discomfort. I told myself that people changed their curtains all the time, and maybe the hole was just a coincidence. But as the hours ticked by, I couldn't get the image of that peephole out of my mind. Every creak in the house, every rustle of wind outside, set my nerves on edge. Around midnight, I decided to go to bed, hoping that sleep would take away the unease. But just as I was about to drift off, I heard a sound that jolted me awake, the unmistakable jiggle of my front door handle. My heart pounded as I shot up in bed, straining to listen. The handle jiggled again, more forcefully this time, as if someone was trying to break in. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed to the front door, my hands trembling. The house was dark, and I could barely see a thing, but I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me. I debated whether to call the police, but I didn't want to overreact if it was nothing. Maybe it was just a stray animal, or the wind, but deep down I knew better. When I reached the front door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I couldn't hear anything on the other side now, just silence. Gathering my courage, I slowly unlocked the door and pulled it open just a crack. There was nothing there, no person, no movement. But as I looked down, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A small piece of paper had been slipped under the door. My hands shook as I picked it up and unfolded it. Written in a scrawling, almost childlike handwriting were the words, "I'm closer than you think." I slammed the door shut, my heart racing. This wasn't just some random prank. Whoever had left that note had been right outside my door, watching, waiting. And the most terrifying part, I had no idea who it was, but I had a sinking feeling in my gut that it was Mr. Wilkins. I double-checked all the locks on my windows and doors, making sure everything was secure. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I barely slept that night, every sound magnified in the darkness, every shadow seeming to move with intent. The next morning I was a mess, exhausted, jumpy, and filled with dread. I tried to go about my day as usual, but all I could think about was the note. I kept the curtains drawn and avoided looking out at Mr. Wilkins' house, but I knew he was there, watching me through that peephole. By the time evening rolled around, I had worked myself into a frenzy. I knew I couldn't go on like this, living in fear. I had to confront him, or at least find out what he was up to. But I also knew I couldn't do it alone. I called my friend Sarah and told her everything. She listened quietly, her voice steady but concerned when she finally spoke. "I'll come over," she said. "We'll figure this out together." Sarah arrived within the hour, her presence immediately calming my nerves. We decided to go over to Mr. Wilkins' house and confront him. If he was responsible for the note, we'd make it clear that his behavior was unacceptable, and if necessary, we'd involve the police. Together, we crossed the street, my heart pounding with every step. When we reached his door, I hesitated before knocking. There was no answer at first, but I knocked again, louder this time. Finally, the door creaked open, and Mr. Wilkins stood there, his face shadowed in the dim light. He looked frail, harmless even, but the way his eyes darted between Sarah and me made my skin crawl. "Yes," he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Wilkins," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to talk. Have you been watching me?" He blinked, his expression blank. "Watching you? No, I don't." But before he could finish, I noticed something inside the house, a small table near the window, cluttered with binoculars, a notebook, and a camera. My stomach turned as I realized the extent of his obsession. Sarah must have seen it too, because she grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "We're leaving," she said firmly. As we turned to go, Mr. Wilkins called out, his voice suddenly desperate. "Wait, you don't understand." But I didn't care to hear what he had to say. We hurried back to my house, my heart still racing. The realization that Mr. Wilkins had been watching me, documenting my every move, was too much to bear. That night, I couldn't sleep, the note's message echoing in my mind, "I'm closer than you think." The next day, I filed a report with the police, and they promised to look into it. They visited Mr. Wilkins, and though they couldn't arrest him, they warned him to stay away from me. They also advised me to consider getting a restraining order. Mr. Wilkins never bothered me again after that, but the damage was done. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sense of unease that had settled over my life. I put my house up for sale shortly after, unable to live there with the memories of his prying eyes and the terror that had seeped into every corner of my home. As I packed up my things, I found the note again, crumpled and forgotten in a drawer. I stared at the words, the fear they had once evoked now replaced by a deep sense of violation. Even though I was leaving, I knew I'd never truly escape the memory of that creepy neighbor and the way he had wormed his way into my life. Story 3. My phone rang at 3 a.m. The shrill sound cut through the silence of the night, jolting me awake. I groggily reached for my phone, squinting at the glowing screen. The caller ID showed unknown. A chill ran down my spine as I hesitated for a moment, contemplating whether to answer. But curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, compelled me to swipe right. "Hello," I croaked, my voice thick with sleep. For a few seconds there was nothing but dead air on the other end. Then, just as I was about to hang up, a shaky voice whispered, "I'm in your house." I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure the person on the other end could hear it. The voice was hoarse, barely more than a breath, but there was no mistaking the menace in those 4 words. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Was this some kind of sick prank? But the voice had sounded so real, so full of fear, or was it malice? I bolted out of bed, my feet hitting the cold floor with a thud that echoed through the quiet house. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, erasing any remnants of sleep. My eyes darted around the room, scanning every shadow, every corner, as I strained to listen for any signs of movement. Grabbing the baseball bat I kept under my bed, an old habit from my college days, I crept out of the bedroom. The hallway stretched out before me, dark and menacing, the moonlight barely piercing through the curtains. I tried to steady my breathing, but it was impossible. My chest felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. I moved cautiously, the bat gripped tightly in my sweaty hands. The hardwood floor creaked beneath my feet as I made my way toward the living room. Every sound seemed amplified: the ticking of the clock on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the soft rustle of the curtains swaying in the breeze. I checked the guest room first, pushing the door open slowly, half expecting to find someone lurking in the shadows. But the room was empty, the bed untouched, the closet door slightly ajar but revealing nothing out of the ordinary. I moved on to the bathroom, then the study, each room revealing nothing but darkness and silence. The living room was next. As I approached, a faint light caught my eye. It was my phone, lying on the couch where I must have left it earlier in the evening. But how had it ended up there when I had just answered it in my bedroom? I shook off the thought, focusing instead on the task at hand. I needed to check the locks, make sure all the windows were secure. As I approached the couch, something strange caught my eye. My phone screen was still lit, but the call history was gone. My heart skipped a beat. The call, the voice, it had vanished as if it had never happened. I checked the phone's log, scrolling through my recent calls, but there was no trace of the unknown caller. No missed calls, no incoming calls. It was as if the entire thing had been a figment of my imagination. But it couldn't have been. I heard that voice, felt the cold dread it brought with it. It was real, wasn't it? I stood in the middle of my living room, bat still in hand, as a deep sense of unease settled over me. My eyes scanned the room once more, landing on the front door. It was locked, the deadbolt firmly in place. I checked the windows, each one sealed shut with no sign of forced entry. Had someone really been in my house? Was it possible they had come and gone without leaving a trace? Or was this some kind of elaborate hoax, a psychological game meant to mess with my head? The silence of the house felt oppressive now, the shadows deeper and more menacing. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I backed into the corner of the room, my eyes darting from the hallway to the kitchen to the living room's darkened corners. The bat felt heavy in my hands, a flimsy defense against an unseen threat. I tried to calm my racing thoughts, to convince myself that it was just a bad dream, a bizarre prank that had gone too far. But the feeling of dread wouldn't go away. The more I tried to rationalize the situation, the more paranoid I became. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the windows made my heart skip a beat. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and keys, threw on a jacket, and bolted out the front door. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face, but it was a relief to be outside, away from the suffocating silence of the house. I got into my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a long moment, trying to steady my trembling hands. My phone buzzed again, startling me. I looked down at the screen, another call from unknown. I stared at the phone, my mind racing with fear and confusion. My thumb hovered over the answer button, but I couldn't bring myself to swipe right. Instead, I let it ring, watching the screen go dark once the call ended. The house loomed behind me, its dark windows staring back at me like eyes in the night. I didn't go back inside that night. Instead, I drove to a friend's house, desperate for the safety of company, the comfort of another person's presence. But even there, I couldn't shake the feeling that the voice on the phone wasn't done with me. And deep down, I knew that the call would come again. Story 4. The attic was a place I rarely ventured into. It was musty, cluttered, and filled with the forgotten remnants of my family's past. But on that particular afternoon, with the sun streaming through the small, grimy window, I decided it was time to tackle the mess. The floor creaked underfoot as I navigated the maze of old furniture, boxes, and cobwebs. After an hour of sorting through piles of old clothes, books, and random trinkets, I came across a large, dusty box tucked away in a corner. It was labeled Old Family Photos. Curious, I pulled it out, sat down on an old trunk, and opened the box. Inside there were stacks of photographs, some faded with age, others still crisp and vibrant. I began to flip through them, smiling at the black and white images of my grandparents on their wedding day, my parents as children, and holiday gatherings long before I was born. Each photo was a snapshot of a moment frozen in time, a window into the lives of my ancestors. But as I continued to sift through the pictures, something caught my eye. In one photo, my grandparents stood in front of their first home, a modest little house with a white picket fence. They were young and happy, smiling broadly at the camera. But there, just behind them, in the shadow of the house, was a dark figure. It was barely visible, almost blending into the shadows, but the more I looked, the clearer it became. A tall, shadowy figure, its features indistinguishable, standing just a few feet behind them. I frowned, leaning in closer. It could have been a trick of the light, or maybe an old photo processing error. I set the photo aside and continued to the next one. This one showed my mother as a little girl, sitting on the front steps of the same house, holding a doll. She was laughing, her hair in pigtails, her eyes bright with joy. But there it was again behind her, near the edge of the frame, that same shadowy figure. A chill ran down my spine. I went through more photos, my fingers trembling slightly now. Each one was the same. Birthday parties, family reunions, vacations all had that same shadowy figure lurking in the background. It was never the focus of the photo, always on the periphery, but unmistakably there. I began to feel uneasy, my heart pounding in my chest. I had never noticed anything unusual about these photos before, but now I couldn't unsee it. Who or what was that figure? Was it someone in the family? A neighbor? A family friend? Or was it something else entirely? My breath hitched as I reached the last photo in the box. It was a recent one, taken just a few months ago at my cousin's wedding. My entire family was there, lined up in front of the church, smiling for the camera. My parents, my siblings, my cousins, we were all there, dressed in our finest, celebrating a joyous occasion. But as I looked closer, my blood ran cold. There it was again, that same shadowy figure, standing just behind us. This time it was even clearer, its outline more defined. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form dark and ominous. I could almost make out where its eyes would be if it had eyes. The figure seemed to loom over us, its presence malevolent, as if it was watching, waiting. I dropped the photo, my hands trembling uncontrollably. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. How could this figure appear in photos spanning decades, looking exactly the same? It didn't make any sense. My rational mind tried to find a logical explanation, a trick of the light, a smudge on the camera lens, maybe even a flaw in the film. But deep down, I knew that none of these explanations felt right. As I sat there, staring at the scattered photos, a thought struck me, one that sent a shiver down my spine. What if this figure wasn't just a shadow in the photos? What if it was something more? What if it had been with my family all this time, following us through the generations, watching from the shadows? I slowly rose to my feet, suddenly aware of how quiet the attic had become. The sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the room. I glanced around nervously, half expecting to see the figure standing in a corner, watching me. But the attic was empty, just as it had always been. Clutching the last photo in my hand, I made my way downstairs, my heart pounding in my ears. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I had uncovered something that was never meant to be found. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump. I kept the box of photos under my bed, too afraid to look at them again, but also too afraid to throw them away. I felt as though I had brought something into my life that I couldn't escape, something dark and foreboding. The next morning I decided to do some research. I needed to know if anyone else in my family had ever noticed the shadowy figure. I called my parents, my aunts, my uncles, everyone I could think of. But no one remembered anything strange about the photos. They all brushed it off, saying it was probably just my imagination or an old camera glitch, but their reassurances did little to calm my nerves. Days turned into weeks, and the unease never left me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the shadowy figure from the photos had somehow crossed over into my life. I started seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye, dark shapes that would disappear the moment I turned to look. I began to avoid the attic altogether, leaving the box of photos untouched, gathering dust under my bed. But deep down, I knew that the figure was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting. And I feared that one day, it would step out from the darkness and make itself known not just in old family photos, but in the world I lived in. Story 5. Working late had become a regular part of my job as a mall security guard, but I never really minded. The silence of the empty corridors and the soft hum of the air conditioning was almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the usual bustling noise of shoppers and chatter during the day. That night was no different until I started hearing footsteps. It was just after midnight, and I was making my rounds, checking that all the stores were locked and everything was in order. The echoes of my own footsteps bounced off the walls as I walked through the darkened halls, the only light coming from the occasional flickering bulb above. I was about to turn a corner when I heard a soft, rhythmic tap-tap behind me. I stopped in my tracks, the sound halting with me. Turning around, I scanned the area, but there was nothing, just the empty mall stretching out behind me. I chuckled to myself, shaking my head. It was probably just the old building settling, I thought, or maybe my mind playing tricks on me after a long day. I continued on my patrol, but the unease lingered. Each time I thought I had put the incident behind me, the sound would return, just faint enough to make me second-guess myself. I'd pause, listen, but still nothing. The tension in my chest grew tighter with each passing minute. Finally, I decided to head to the security office to check the cameras. If someone was messing with me, I'd catch them on the monitors. As I walked, I passed by a series of large, ornate mirrors lining the walls near one of the department stores. Something caught my eye in the reflection, a flash of red, just for a moment. I took a step back and peered closer. Scrawled across the mirror in bright red lipstick were the words, "We're waiting for you." I felt a chill run down my spine. My first thought was that it had to be a prank, some kid sneaking in after hours to get a rise out of the security guard. But the mall was locked down tight. There was no way anyone could have gotten in without tripping the alarms. My pulse quickened as I moved down the corridor, checking each mirror I passed. The message was written on all of them, in the same thick, looping handwriting. "We're waiting for you." I pulled out my radio and called for backup, but the only response was static. My heart pounded harder as I fiddled with the dials trying to get a clear signal. Nothing. The unease turned into full-blown fear. I abandoned the idea of checking the cameras and instead made my way toward the exit. If this was some kind of joke, it wasn't funny anymore. But as I reached the main entrance, I found the doors locked tight. The key I had always used didn't fit the lock. I spun around, my back pressed against the cold glass of the door. The mall felt different now, like it was alive and watching me. The once familiar corridors seemed to stretch on endlessly, every shadow deeper, every sound amplified. The soft tap-tap of footsteps echoed once again, this time louder, closer. Panic gripped me as I bolted down the hallway, my footsteps thundering against the tiled floor. The mirrors on either side seemed to reflect not just me, but something else, blurry figures that moved just out of sync with my own reflection. My breath came in ragged gasps as I ran past the darkened stores, their mannequins staring lifelessly out at me, like silent witnesses to my terror. I turned a corner and nearly slipped as I came to a stop in front of the mall's central fountain. The water, usually calm and clear, was now a murky red, like blood. I stared, horrified, as the crimson liquid bubbled up, spilling over the edges. The words "We're waiting for you" were now etched into the floor in front of the fountain, as if burned into the tiles. The footsteps grew louder, surrounding me. I spun around, desperate to find the source, but all I saw were shadows, dozens of them emerging from the darkness, their forms flickering like the failing lights above. They moved closer, their faces obscured, their bodies ethereal and barely solid. But their eyes burned with an unnatural light, fixing on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Backing away, I stumbled into a small alcove, a fitting room, its curtains half drawn. I yanked the curtain shut behind me, pressing myself against the wall. My heart raced so fast I thought it might burst. I tried to control my breathing, tried to convince myself that this wasn't real, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me after too many hours on the job. But then I heard the unmistakable sound of the curtain being slowly drawn open. I looked up, and there they were. The shadows had found me, their figures filling the small space, surrounding me on all sides. I could see their eyes, glowing in the darkness, and the faint outline of a smile on what I assumed were their faces. One of them leaned in close, so close I could feel the chill emanating from its form. It whispered in a voice that was both everywhere and nowhere, "We've been waiting for you." Before I could scream, they were upon me, the darkness swallowing me whole. Story 6. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting any visitors, and I hadn't ordered anything online, so the sound caught me off guard. I peeked through the peephole but saw no one. The only thing on the doorstep was a small, plain package with no return address. A strange unease settled over me as I picked it up. It was surprisingly light, wrapped in brown paper, and sealed with clear tape. My name and address were written in neat, black ink, but there were no other markings. I brought the package inside, setting it on the kitchen table. The house was quiet, with the usual hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock as my only companions. As I stared at the package, a sense of dread began to creep in. There was something unsettling about it, something that made me hesitate before opening it. But curiosity got the better of me. I carefully peeled away the tape and unfolded the paper. Inside was a small, unmarked black box. I lifted the lid to find a single DVD, also unmarked, resting on a bed of cotton. My brow furrowed in confusion. Who would send me a DVD without any explanation? I retrieved my laptop, sliding the DVD into the drive. The screen flickered to life, and I leaned in closer as the video began to play. The footage was grainy and dark, but I could make out the outline of a bedroom, a very familiar bedroom. My bedroom. My breath caught in my throat as I watched. The camera was positioned in the corner of the room, facing the bed. The timestamp in the corner of the screen indicated the footage was from the previous night. My heart pounded as I saw myself lying in bed, sound asleep, completely unaware that I was being watched. The video played on, capturing hours of footage in eerie silence. The only sounds were the occasional rustling of sheets and my steady breathing. There was something deeply disturbing about seeing myself like this, so vulnerable, so exposed. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen, even as a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Then, as the video neared its end, the camera began to zoom in. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, but then with increasing speed. It zeroed in on my face, capturing every detail: the rise and fall of my chest, the slight twitch of my eyelids, the strands of hair falling across my pillow. The zoom continued until my face filled the entire screen, and the video froze on the final frame, a close-up of my face, peaceful and unaware. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands trembling. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Who had taken that video? How had they gotten into my house? And why would they send it to me? I stood up abruptly, pacing the room as I tried to calm my racing thoughts. The idea that someone had been in my bedroom, watching me as I slept, was terrifying. I felt violated, my privacy shattered in the most intimate of spaces. My first instinct was to call the police, but something stopped me. What would I even tell them? That someone had sent me a video of myself sleeping? Would they take me seriously? And what if whoever had sent the package was still watching, waiting for my reaction? I checked the locks on all the doors and windows, making sure they were secure. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was out there, observing my every move. Unable to sit still, I grabbed a flashlight and did a thorough sweep of the house, checking every nook and cranny. The basement, the attic, the closets, everything was clear. But no matter how many times I reassured myself that the house was empty, the unease lingered. I returned to the kitchen, staring at the black box on the table. It felt like a taunt, a cruel reminder that someone had breached the sanctity of my home. My thoughts spun in circles, trying to piece together who could have done this and why. Had I angered someone without realizing it? Was this a prank taken too far? Or was it something more sinister? I couldn't stay in the house that night. The very walls seemed to close in on me, the shadows lurking in the corners feeling like they were hiding something or someone. I grabbed my keys and left, heading to a nearby hotel where I could at least feel a semblance of safety. Lying in the unfamiliar bed of the hotel room, I kept the lights on and my eyes wide open, but sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the final frame of the video, the camera zooming in on my face, capturing my unconsciousness in disturbing detail. The memory of the package, the video, and the feeling of being watched haunted me. I knew I had to find out who was behind this. The thought of returning home filled me with dread, but I couldn't run forever. Whoever had done this was out there, and until I found out who and why, I would never feel safe again. The mystery of the package had upended my life, and as I lay there in the dark, I vowed to uncover the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. Story 7. The bus was nearly empty as I boarded, the only sounds the hiss of the hydraulic doors and the low hum of the engine. It was one of those late-night rides home that I'd grown accustomed to after long shifts at work. The city outside was dark, only the occasional street lamp breaking the monotony of the night. The familiar creaks of the bus felt almost comforting, a strange lullaby after a tiring day. I chose a seat near the back, where I could lean against the window and watch the world blur by. The bus jolted slightly as it pulled away from the stop, the movement soothing as I settled in, my eyelids heavy with exhaustion. There were a few other passengers scattered throughout the bus, but none near me. I sighed, grateful for the solitude. As we drove through the quiet streets, I drifted in and out of a light sleep, the steady rhythm of the bus lulling me further. The world outside became a series of fleeting images: dark storefronts, empty sidewalks, the occasional stray dog. My thoughts meandered, aimlessly drifting between the events of the day and the relief of finally heading home. It was during one of these hazy moments that I felt the unmistakable sensation of someone sitting down beside me. The seat dipped slightly, and I instinctively shifted to give the person more room. My tired mind didn't fully register the strangeness of it at first, the sensation so ordinary that I didn't think twice. I continued to stare out the window, the blur of the city lights reflecting off the glass. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something odd. The seat beside me seemed empty. Confused, I turned my head to look directly, but there was no one there. The seat, though slightly depressed as if occupied, was vacant. A chill crept up my spine as I quickly scanned the bus. The few passengers who had been on board earlier were still there, sitting in their respective spots, none of them paying any attention to me. I frowned, trying to shake off the unease that was slowly building inside me. Maybe I was just imagining things, I thought. It had been a long day, and I was probably more tired than I realized. But as I settled back into my seat, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. The sensation of being watched, of not being alone, persisted, prickling at the edges of my consciousness. The bus continued its journey, the streets outside growing darker as we left the more populated areas. I tried to focus on the passing scenery, on anything other than the empty seat beside me, but my mind kept drifting back. Every so often I'd glance sideways, half expecting to see someone materialize out of thin air, but the seat remained empty. Then, without warning, the lights inside the bus flickered. It was brief, just a split second, but it was enough to make my heart skip a beat. I straightened up, suddenly fully alert, my pulse quickening as I looked around. The other passengers didn't seem to notice, still lost in their own worlds, but I couldn't shake the sense of unease that was quickly turning into fear. I glanced at the driver, hoping for some reassurance, but he was focused on the road, oblivious to my growing anxiety. The bus rumbled on, the darkened streets outside offering no comfort. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but the air felt thick, almost oppressive. That's when I felt it again, a presence beside me, closer this time. My skin prickled, and I turned my head ever so slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The seat was still empty, but I could feel it, a weight, a coldness that hadn't been there before. It was as if someone or something was sitting there, watching me with unseen eyes. Panicking, I quickly stood up and moved to a seat closer to the front, near the few remaining passengers. I could feel their curious glances as I sat down, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be as far away from that seat as possible. As the bus neared my stop, I kept my eyes firmly on the front, refusing to look back. I gripped the edge of my seat, counting down the minutes until I could leave this unnerving ride behind. When the bus finally slowed to a stop, I practically leaped out of my seat, hurrying towards the doors. The driver gave me a strange look as I passed, but I didn't stop to explain. I just wanted to get off that bus and into the safety of the open air. But just as I reached the doors, I hesitated, turning back to the driver. "Did anyone else get on after my stop?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The driver furrowed his brow, shaking his head. "No, you were the last one. Why?" I stared at him, my heart pounding in my ears. I thought I saw someone. The driver's expression softened, as if he understood more than he was letting on. "Late night rides can play tricks on you," he said quietly. "Best not to think too much about it." I nodded numbly, stepping off the bus and into the cool night air. As the bus drove away, I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. I could still feel the weight of that unseen presence, the lingering coldness that had seeped into my bones. That night I barely slept, my mind racing with thoughts of the empty seat and the unseen passenger who had joined me on my ride home. From then on, I avoided the back of the bus, unwilling to take any chances. The memory of that night haunted me, a constant reminder that sometimes the things we can't see are the ones we should fear the most. Story 8. After a recent break-in, I decided it was time to install a top-of-the-line security system. The incident had left me shaken, and I wasn't going to let something like that happen again. I spared no expense, opting for a system with cameras, motion detectors, and an alarm that would alert me and the authorities if anything unusual happened. The technician assured me that it was one of the best on the market, nearly impossible to tamper with. For the first few weeks, life slowly returned to normal. I slept better knowing that my home was secure, the memory of the break-in fading as I focused on work and other daily routines. But one night, just as I was beginning to drift off to sleep, the piercing sound of the alarm jolted me awake. My heart pounded as I scrambled out of bed, my mind racing through every possible scenario. I grabbed my phone and quickly accessed the security systems app, expecting to see footage of someone trying to break in. But to my surprise, everything looked perfectly normal. The cameras showed empty rooms, the motion detectors reported no activity, and all the doors and windows were still locked. Confused, I reset the alarm, chalking it up to a possible glitch. After all, no system is perfect, right? But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I walked through the house, checking every room and corner, but everything seemed just as it should be. Finally, convincing myself that it was indeed just a technical error, I returned to bed, though it took me a while to fall back asleep. The next morning, I called the security company to report the false alarm. They ran a diagnostic test remotely and assured me that the system was working fine, with no indication of any tampering or malfunction. Their reassurances did little to ease my anxiety, but I had no choice but to trust their expertise. Days passed without incident, and I began to relax again. But then, late one night, the alarm went off once more. This time I didn't bother checking the app right away. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed and cautiously made my way downstairs. The house was eerily silent, the only sound being my own heavy breathing and the soft creak of the floorboards under my feet. When I reached the living room, I was greeted by the sight of the security panel flashing red. The alarm was still blaring, but there was no sign of a break-in. The doors were locked, the windows secure, and the cameras showed nothing out of the ordinary. Frustrated, I reset the alarm again and turned off the blaring noise. As I was about to head back to bed, something caught my eye. The security panel, usually firmly fixed to the wall, seemed slightly askew. I stepped closer and saw that the screws had been loosened, the panel barely hanging on. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized that someone had been in my house. I quickly removed the panel, revealing a tangle of wires that had been cut and reconnected in a way that I couldn't understand. I rushed to the phone to call the police, but before I could dial, my eyes were drawn to the coffee table in the center of the living room. There, in the middle of the table, was a small piece of paper. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it stood out like a beacon in the dimly lit room. I walked over, my hands trembling as I picked it up. In neat, almost meticulous handwriting, the note read, "You weren't supposed to see this." My blood ran cold as the weight of the situation settled in. Someone had not only breached my supposedly secure system, but had also been inside my house, inside my living room, without my knowledge. They had tampered with my alarm, likely to test how much they could manipulate it without triggering a response, and somehow I had interrupted them. I felt sick to my stomach. How long had they been in my house? Had they watched me sleep? Were they still watching me now? I quickly dialed the police, my voice shaky as I explained what had happened. They arrived within minutes, but by the time they got there, the intruder was long gone. The police officers were thorough, checking every possible entry point and going over the security footage with a fine-tooth comb. But there was nothing, no sign of forced entry, no clear image of the intruder on the cameras. The only evidence was the note, which they took as part of their investigation. Days passed, but the police were unable to find any leads. They suggested that I upgrade my security system, but even that offered little comfort. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sense that whoever had been in my house wasn't done yet. Every creak, every shadow sent my heart racing, and I found myself jumping at the slightest noise. Weeks turned into months, and the break-in became another unsolved mystery. But the note remained etched in my mind, a constant reminder that someone had been in my home and that they could return whenever they wanted. I eventually replaced the security system with an even more advanced one, but the sense of safety I had once felt was gone, replaced by a lingering fear that I couldn't quite shake. And every night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but wonder, what wasn't I supposed to see? Story 9. It started on an ordinary Monday. I was getting ready for bed when I noticed a small piece of paper sticking out from under my front door. I picked it up, thinking it might be a flyer or a misplaced letter. But as I unfolded it, I felt a chill run down my spine. The note was handwritten, the letters slightly jagged, as if the writer was in a hurry or unsettled. It read, "Today you wore a blue jacket and black jeans. You grabbed coffee from the shop on Elm Street and spent 15 minutes chatting with the barista, Sarah." I dropped the note as if it had burned my fingers. Who would write something like this? My mind raced, trying to rationalize the situation. Maybe it was a prank, a strange joke by someone who knew me well enough to describe my day in such detail. But even then, it felt too personal, too invasive. I checked my windows and doors, making sure everything was locked, before convincing myself it was just a one-time thing. But the uneasy feeling lingered as I fell asleep, the note still crumpled on the floor. The next morning, I found another note. This one was longer, but You spent your lunch break at the park today. You sat on the third bench from the entrance, facing the pond. You fed the ducks, even though the sign says not to. Afterward, you visited the bookstore on Maple Street and bought a mystery novel. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The notes were unsettlingly accurate. My routine was nothing special, but seeing it written out by a stranger made it feel like I was being stalked, like I was a character in some twisted game. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That someone was leaving notes describing my daily life. They'd probably brush it off as a harmless prank. Besides, there was no real threat yet. As the week progressed, the notes became more frequent, and the details more intimate. They mentioned conversations I had with coworkers, the route I took home, even the groceries I bought. Each note was a reminder that I was never truly alone, that someone out there was keeping tabs on me. I started changing my routine, hoping to throw off whoever was following me. I took different routes to work, skipped my usual coffee stop, and avoided places where I might be seen. But no matter what I did, the notes kept coming, describing my altered routine with the same unnerving precision. You're trying to lose me, aren't you? But I'm always watching. Tonight you stayed late at the office hoping I wouldn't notice. But I saw you, working on that report, your brow furrowed in concentration. You left at 8:47 p.m. and walked home in the dark, even though the bus would have been safer. By now I was terrified. I couldn't understand how they were doing it. How could someone know so much about my every move? I started looking over my shoulder, feeling paranoid whenever I stepped outside. I avoided eye contact with strangers, suspecting everyone around me. The notes had taken over my life, turning every day into a nightmare of anxiety and fear. Then came the final note. Tonight I'll be closer. Those 4 words sent me into a panic. What did they mean by closer? Were they planning to break into my apartment? Attack me on the street? I had no idea what to expect, and that was the worst part. I called the police, my hands shaking as I dialed the number. This time I couldn't brush it off as a prank. They promised to send a patrol car to check the area, but their assurances did little to calm my nerves. I couldn't stay in my apartment, not with the possibility of someone lurking just outside. I packed a bag, deciding to stay at a friend's place for the night. As I was leaving, I heard a soft knock on the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly approached, peering through the peephole. No one was there. I hesitated, then opened the door, my breath catching in my throat. There was nothing, no person, no note, just the quiet hallway. I slammed the door shut and grabbed my bag, practically running out of the building. My friend lived across town, and the drive felt like it took forever. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a car following me, but the roads were empty. When I finally arrived, I collapsed on my friend's couch, exhausted and shaken. I explained everything, showing them the notes I had kept. They were as horrified as I was, insisting I stay with them until things blew over. That night I barely slept. Every creak, every shadow seemed to hide a threat. My friend tried to reassure me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even there. The next morning, there was no new note, and the police found no signs of anyone near my apartment. But the fear lingered, a constant presence in the back of my mind. I never found out who wrote the notes or why they targeted me. I moved to a new apartment in a different part of the city, hoping to leave the nightmare behind. But sometimes when I'm alone, I still feel that familiar chill, like someone's eyes are on me, watching from the shadows. And I wonder if the stalker is still out there, waiting to slip another note under my door. Story 10. I had always dreamed of owning a home, a place to call my own. After years of saving, I finally bought a modest 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood. The house wasn't anything grand, but it had character-charming details like a creaky wooden staircase, large bay windows, and an attic with a small round window that overlooked the street. It was the kind of house that had a history, one that I hoped would soon be filled with new memories of my own. The first few days were a whirlwind of moving boxes, unpacking and settling in. The neighborhood was as peaceful as I had imagined. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves in the breeze and the occasional bark of a distant dog. I quickly settled into a routine, enjoying the solitude and the comforting stillness of the house. But it wasn't long before I noticed something strange. Every night, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I would hear footsteps upstairs. At first, I dismissed it as the house settling, or perhaps my imagination running wild in the unfamiliar space. But the footsteps persisted, night after night, always around the same time. They were slow, deliberate, and distinctly human. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the old pipes, I told myself, or the wind finding its way through the old house's crevices. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The footsteps had a weight to them, as if someone was pacing back and forth in the upstairs hallway. I started to dread nighttime. I would lie in bed, heart pounding, waiting for the footsteps to start. When they did, I would freeze, unable to move, hoping that they would stop soon. They always did, after what felt like an eternity, but the fear lingered long after. One evening, after yet another restless night, I decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, I climbed the creaky staircase and made my way to the second floor. The hallway was dark, the kind of dark that seemed to swallow the weak beam of my flashlight. I checked each room, my footsteps echoing off the wooden floors, but found nothing unusual. The rooms were empty, just as I had left them. Finally, I reached the attic door. It was an old wooden door with a brass knob, slightly worn from years of use. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I hadn't been up to the attic since I moved in. There was no reason to, as I had no need for the extra storage space. But the footsteps, they had to be coming from somewhere. With a deep breath, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The attic was musty and filled with the scent of aged wood and dust. The round window cast a pale sliver of moonlight across the floor, illuminating the old boxes and furniture that the previous owners had left behind. It was exactly as I expected, silent, empty, and undisturbed. I was about to close the door when something caught my eye. In the thin layer of dust that covered the floor, I saw them a set of footprints. They were faint but unmistakable, leading from the attic door to the other side of the room. My heart skipped a beat as I followed them with my flashlight. They stopped just in front of an old wardrobe, one I hadn't noticed before. The wardrobe was tall and imposing, made of dark wood with ornate carvings on the doors. It looked out of place among the other forgotten belongings, as if it had been left there on purpose. I reached out to open it, but a chill ran down my spine and I hesitated. Something about the wardrobe felt wrong. I backed away slowly, deciding to leave the attic and lock the door behind me. But as I turned to leave, the attic door slammed shut with a force that made me jump. I ran to the door, my heart racing, and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Panicking, I banged on the door and yelled for help, even though I knew no one would hear me. My phone was downstairs, and I was alone. The air in the attic felt thick and suffocating, and I could feel the walls closing in on me. I had to get out. In a desperate attempt, I turned back to the wardrobe. Maybe there was another way out, a hidden passage or something that I hadn't noticed. I yanked the doors open, and inside I found a small, dusty mirror leaning against the back. The reflection in the mirror wasn't mine. I stared in horror as the figure in the mirror moved. It was a man, tall and thin, with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. He was standing in the attic, just behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. The attic was empty, just as before. But when I looked back at the mirror, the man was gone, and in his place was a message scrawled in the dust, "You're not alone." The attic door creaked open on its own, and I fled, not daring to look back. I locked the attic and the master bedroom doors and spent the night on the couch, clutching a kitchen knife. The footsteps never returned after that night, but the house no longer felt like mine. It was as if the walls themselves were watching, waiting for something. The next morning I packed a bag and left the house without looking back. I never returned, leaving it to its secrets and the figure in the mirror. It was no longer my home, and I didn't want to find out who or what had claimed it. Story 11. The late-night diner was a sanctuary of sorts for me. It was a place where I could retreat from the noise and chaos of the day, enjoying the quiet solace of a meal. That night, the diner was particularly empty, save for a few scattered patrons and the low hum of the neon sign outside. I settled into a booth near the back, facing the counter. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, creating a sense of comfort that was both familiar and reassuring. I flipped through the pages of the menu, trying to decide between the meatloaf and the burgers, when I noticed something odd. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure sitting in the booth behind me. I glanced over my shoulder but saw nothing, just the empty booth and the flickering light above it. I shook my head, attributing it to the dim lighting playing tricks on my eyes. Returning to the menu, I decided on the meatloaf. As I waited for my food, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I glanced over my shoulder again, but the booth behind me remained empty. I tried to ignore the unsettling feeling, focusing instead on the warm coffee in front of me and the comfort of the diner's ambience. The minutes ticked by slowly. My food arrived and I began to eat, forcing myself to push away the feeling of unease. I distracted myself with thoughts of work and upcoming plans, trying not to let my mind wander back to the mysterious figure. I enjoyed the meatloaf more than I expected, savoring each bite. But the feeling of being watched never left me. Every now and then I'd catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, but each time I looked, the booth behind me was still empty. It was as though someone or something was deliberately trying to stay out of view. When I finished my meal and signaled for the check, I felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. I was eager to leave, but there was an odd sense of foreboding that made me linger. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with a tired smile, brought the bill and chatted briefly as I paid. As I gathered my belongings and stood up to leave, I glanced one last time at the booth behind me. Empty. The diner's light cast long shadows, and the atmosphere felt even more eerie now that I was standing. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the creeping unease, and headed for the exit. Just as I reached the door, I noticed a folded note lying on the table where I had been sitting. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen anyone come near my table while I was eating. I hesitated for a moment, my curiosity battling with a sense of dread, then walked back to the booth to pick up the note. With trembling hands, I unfolded it. The message was written in neat, deliberate handwriting. "We've been watching." A chill ran down my spine. I looked around the diner, but it was still empty, the only sound the distant hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of dishes from the kitchen. The note felt like a personal invasion, a reminder that someone had been observing me, perhaps even during the entire time I was there. I stuffed the note into my pocket, my mind racing. Had someone been following me? The thought made my skin crawl. I glanced around the diner once more, trying to spot anything unusual, but everything seemed normal. I was alone in my paranoia, but the note was a stark reminder that someone knew where I was and had chosen to leave a message. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I glanced around the parking lot, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. My car was parked under a street lamp, casting a pool of light on the asphalt. I walked briskly to it, keeping my eyes peeled for any sign of movement. I unlocked the door and slipped inside, locking it behind me. The drive home was tense, every shadow and passing car making me jump. I replayed the note over and over in my mind, trying to piece together what it meant. Who had been watching me, and why? The simple message seemed to carry a weight far beyond its words. When I arrived home, I checked every room, every corner, as if expecting someone to be hiding there. I found nothing out of the ordinary, but the sense of unease lingered. I pulled the note from my pocket and read it again, my thoughts racing. The handwriting was clean and legible, but I didn't recognize it. There were no clues as to who might have left it. Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, I locked all the doors and windows before sitting down at my desk, trying to distract myself with work, but my concentration was shattered. Every creak of the house seemed amplified, every gust of wind against the window like a whispering threat. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me, and I fell into a restless sleep. But even in my dreams, the note haunted me, and the sense of being watched never fully receded. The next morning, I found the note still in my pocket, a chilling reminder of the previous night's events. I tried to put it out of my mind, attributing it to a prank or a misguided joke. But as days passed, the unease remained, a shadow lurking in the corners of my thoughts. The late-night diner visit became a haunting memory, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was still watching me. Story 12. It was the kind of adventure that drew me and my friend Mark together exploring abandoned places. This time our destination was the Old St. Augustine Hospital, a decrepit relic from the mid-20th century that had long since been closed down. Rumors of eerie occurrences and strange noises had surrounded the place for years, but that only fueled our excitement. We were both seasoned explorers, always on the lookout for our next thrill. As we approached the hospital, the building loomed before us like a forsaken giant. Its once grand facade was now covered in layers of grime and neglect. Broken windows gaped like hollow eyes, and the front door, barely hanging on its hinges, creaked ominously as we pushed it open. The interior was a maze of abandoned hallways and darkened rooms, each step echoing with a hollow sound. The air was thick with dust and decay, and the once sterile smell of antiseptic had long since been replaced by the musty stench of mold. Our flashlights cut through the gloom, casting long, eerie shadows on the cracked walls. Mark and I had a rule during our explorations: we always stayed together. But the hospital was so vast and our curiosity got the better of us. We decided to split up to cover more ground, agreeing to meet back in the main lobby in an hour. As I wandered through the labyrinthine corridors, the oppressive silence was occasionally broken by the distant clatter of metal and the faint whispers that seemed to drift through the hallways. I tried to dismiss them as echoes or my imagination running wild, but they had an unsettling quality to them. Each time I stopped to listen, the whispers would fade away, leaving only the sound of my own breathing and the shuffling of my feet. The farther I ventured into the building, the more disoriented I became. The layout was a confusing tangle of hallways and staircases, each corridor looking remarkably similar to the last. I could hear the occasional scurrying of small creatures and the distant groan of the old building settling, but other than that, the place was eerily quiet. Eventually, I found myself in a darkened room that appeared to have once been a patient's quarters. The room was shrouded in darkness, with only the dim light from my flashlight revealing the outlines of dilapidated furniture and peeling wallpaper. The air felt colder here, and a shiver ran down my spine. I had the distinct feeling that I was not alone, though I couldn't quite place why. I moved to the center of the room, my flashlight sweeping across the walls. It was then that I saw a message scrawled on the wall in what looked like dried, dark red paint, or possibly something more sinister. The message read, "You shouldn't be here." My heart skipped a beat. I stepped closer, shining my flashlight directly on the words to ensure I wasn't imagining things. The message was clear and chilling. The handwriting was jagged and uneven, adding to the ominous atmosphere. I could feel my pulse quicken, a mix of fear and adrenaline surging through me. I glanced around the room, half expecting someone or something to leap out at me. The whispers from earlier seemed to grow louder in my mind, though they remained faint and elusive. I tried to call out to Mark, but my voice came out as a hoarse whisper, swallowed by the oppressive silence. Determined to find an explanation, I searched the room more thoroughly. The walls were lined with faded medical posters and old, rusted medical equipment covered in dust. Nothing seemed out of place, aside from the disturbing message. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, or that I had stumbled into a place I wasn't meant to be. Just as I was about to leave the room and search for Mark, I heard a loud crash from somewhere in the building. My heart raced. The sound echoed through the corridors, and I instinctively moved toward it, hoping it was Mark. I navigated the twisting hallways, my flashlight beam darting in every direction, but the corridors seemed even darker and more labyrinthine than before. When I finally reached the source of the noise, I found nothing but an overturned cart and scattered medical supplies. There was no sign of Mark, and the building was as silent as ever. I felt a rising panic, the realization that I was alone in this vast, decaying hospital weighing heavily on me. I tried to call out again, my voice trembling with fear. I decided to return to the main lobby, hoping that Mark would be waiting there. The journey back was nerve-wracking. Every creak and groan of the building seemed amplified, and the whispers from earlier seemed to follow me, growing more insistent and urgent. I moved quickly, my flashlight darting around the dark corners, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was just out of sight, watching me. When I finally reached the lobby, Mark was there, leaning against the wall and looking visibly shaken. His face lit up with relief when he saw me. "There you are," he exclaimed. I was starting to get worried. I relayed my experience to him, showing him the eerie message I had found. Mark listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each detail. He suggested that we leave immediately, and I wholeheartedly agreed. We made our way out of the building, the sense of unease not lifting until we were safely outside. As we drove away from the abandoned hospital, the weight of what we had experienced settled over us. The message on the wall and the whispers that had followed me were unsettling, a stark reminder of the dangers that lurk in places long forgotten by time. To this day, the memory of that night haunts me. The abandoned hospital remains a dark chapter in my life, a place where the past seemed to bleed into the present, and where the message on the wall was a chilling reminder that some places are best left undisturbed. Story 13. The late shift at the office was usually quiet, a welcome reprieve from the day's frenetic pace. As the lone worker in the building, I'd grown accustomed to the silence that blanketed the corridors. It was a solitude I found oddly comforting, a space to think without the constant buzz of conversation and the clatter of keyboards. But tonight the usual calm was tinged with an unsettling edge. I punched the button for the elevator and waited in the dimly lit lobby, the fluorescent lights flickering intermittently overhead. My mind was on autopilot as I replayed the day's events, the hum of the elevator growing louder as it approached. The doors slid open with a soft chime and I stepped inside, the familiar scent of metal and cleaning chemicals greeting me. I pressed the button for my floor and leaned back against the wall, my eyes drifting over the unremarkable interior. The elevator lurched into motion, and I felt the familiar jolt as it began its ascent. But as the elevator began its journey, something felt off. The elevator stopped at the first floor, a brief pause before the doors slid open to an empty hallway. The scene was mundane, the floor deserted as always at this hour. I could see my own reflection in the shiny doors across from me, the fluorescent light casting a ghostly pallor over my face. The doors closed again, and the elevator continued its ascent. It stopped at the second floor. The same emptiness greeted me. The pattern continued, each floor a carbon copy of the last, vacant, silent, and still. My anxiety began to rise with each stop, the unease of the unknown creeping over me like a cold draft. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though the empty elevator and deserted floors offered no clues. By the time we reached the fifth floor, my nerves were frayed. Each stop felt like an eternity, and the sensation of being trapped in the small metal box with no escape began to take its toll. I paced in the confined space, the elevator's repetitive chime echoing in my ears. The minutes seemed to stretch into hours, each second a test of my composure. Finally, the elevator dinged, signaling our arrival at my floor. The doors slid open with an almost mocking smoothness, and I stepped out with a sense of relief. But just as I was about to walk away, a small, crumpled piece of paper fell from the elevator's interior, fluttering to the ground at my feet. I stared at it for a moment, unsure of what to do. My curiosity and perhaps a bit of dread compelled me to pick it up. Unfolding the note with trembling hands, I read the words scrawled in uneven handwriting. "I've been following you." A chill ran down my spine. The note was eerily simple, but the message was clear. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced back at the now closed elevator doors. Had someone been tracking my movements? The thought was both frightening and absurd. I knew the building was secure, with cameras installed in every corridor and common area. But if someone had been able to get past security and follow me, what else might they be capable of? I hurried back to my desk, the note clutched tightly in my hand. My mind raced with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Had someone been monitoring my movements, waiting for the perfect moment to confront me? Or was this a cruel prank designed to unsettle me? I pulled up the security footage on my computer, fast-forwarding through the recording of the elevator lobby. My heart sank as I reviewed the footage. The camera captured the elevator arriving at each floor, but no one else was visible in the frame. It was as if the floors were populated only by shadows and echoes. I rewound the footage and watched it again, more closely this time. Still, there was no one to be seen. I tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe it was a prank from one of my colleagues, a joke taken too far. But the unease lingered, and the note remained a grim reminder of the night's events. I decided to take extra precautions, ensuring that all the office doors were securely locked and checking the perimeter of the building. As the hours ticked by, the building seemed to grow quieter, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. The shadows in the corners seemed darker, the hum of the air conditioning louder. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even though every security measure I took reassured me that I was alone. The rest of the night passed in a haze of vigilance and paranoia. I kept glancing at the elevators, half expecting the doors to open and reveal a hidden figure. But the building remained empty, save for my own tense presence. When the first rays of dawn began to seep through the office windows, I finally allowed myself a moment of respite. I left the office as soon as the sun was up, the early morning light offering a semblance of comfort. The note remained on my desk, a silent testament to the fear that had taken hold of me. I decided to report the incident to building security, hoping that a thorough review of the security footage and an increased presence in the building would provide some answers. As I walked to my car, I glanced back at the office building. It loomed behind me, a fortress of steel and glass that now felt more like a trap than a sanctuary. I couldn't shake the feeling that the note was just the beginning, that the true nature of the threat remained hidden, waiting for its next opportunity. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't escape the lingering sense of unease. The note remained a haunting reminder of that night, a chilling piece of evidence that someone or something had been following me. And though the security measures were increased and the building was thoroughly inspected, the fear never fully left me. Every time I entered the elevator, I found myself glancing at the closed doors, half expecting to see a shadow or a figure emerging from the darkness. The late-night call and the eerie note had left an indelible mark on my psyche, a reminder that sometimes the scariest things are not what we can see, but what we can see, but what we can't. Story 14. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the quiet lot as I parked my car and headed toward the building. It was a small, inconspicuous office tucked away on the edge of town, a place I frequented occasionally for work-related errands. Today, I was simply dropping off some documents and expected to be in and out quickly. The lot was eerily deserted, save for a few other cars parked at odd angles. I thought nothing of it as I locked my car and walked briskly toward the entrance of the building. The door clicked open, and the cool air inside was a welcome relief from the heat. I made my way to the receptionist, exchanged pleasantries, and handed over the paperwork. The whole process took no more than 15 minutes. As I left the building, the sky had begun to darken, a soft twilight settling over the area. I walked back to the lot, my steps echoing against the concrete. That's when I noticed something was wrong. My car was no longer where I had parked it. My heart began to race. I stopped abruptly, my eyes scanning the lot for any sign of my vehicle. A quick check of the surrounding area revealed that my car was nowhere in sight. I felt a jolt of panic surge through me. I fumbled for my phone, ready to call the police, but before I could dial, something caught my eye. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving with a slow, deliberate pace. I squinted, trying to make out any details, but the figure was too far away, their face obscured by the dim light. The figure seemed to be walking toward me, but I was too absorbed in my predicament to focus on them. I turned my attention back to the lot. Maybe my car had been towed, I thought. I checked the signs around the lot to see if there was a note about towing or parking restrictions, but nothing stood out. My panic grew with each passing second. I looked around for any sign of someone who might help, but the lot was as deserted as it had been when I first arrived. Then, as if in a trance, I approached the spot where my car had been parked. That's when I saw a message scrawled in dust on the windshield of an old, beat-up car parked nearby. The message read, "You should have stayed inside." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The handwriting was messy, almost frantic, and the message was unsettling in its simplicity. It was as if whoever had written it knew exactly where to leave it for me to find. I looked around again, more frantically now, hoping to see anyone who could explain this. Just then, the figure I had seen earlier moved closer, emerging from the shadows with a purposeful stride. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The figure was cloaked in darkness, their features still indistinguishable. My heart pounded as I took a hesitant step back. "What's going on?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Where's my car?" The figure stopped, but did not respond. I could barely make out their silhouette in the fading light. I took another step back, my fear escalating. I had no idea who this person was or what they wanted. The message on the windshield seemed to hint at something ominous, something far beyond a mere car theft. I turned to leave, hoping to find help elsewhere, but just as I did, the figure spoke. Their voice was low and distorted, as if coming from a distance. It's not about the car, it's about the message. I stopped in my tracks, my mind racing. What message? What was going on? I turned back toward the figure, but they were already retreating, their form fading into the growing darkness. I felt a mixture of fear and frustration. I had to know what was happening. I approached the old car with the message. As I examined it more closely, I noticed something strange. The dust on the windshield seemed to be disturbed, as if someone had recently touched it. I could make out faint, hurried footprints leading away from the car, vanishing into the dimly lit lot. My mind raced with questions. Who had written the message? Why had they taken my car? And what did they mean by "you should have stayed inside"? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something sinister at play, something more than a simple prank or theft. I decided to call the police. I dialed 911, my hands trembling. As I explained the situation, I could hear the urgency in the dispatcher's voice. They assured me that an officer would be dispatched to the scene immediately. As I waited, I felt a growing sense of dread. The night had fully settled, and the lot was bathed in eerie, dim light from a few scattered street lamps. I paced nervously, glancing around every few seconds. Every shadow seemed to shift and move, and every sound seemed amplified in the silence. When the police arrived, they took my statement and began to investigate. They checked the lot and interviewed a few nearby businesses, but there were no witnesses and no surveillance footage. My car was nowhere to be found, and the old car with the message was still there, untouched. The officers seemed puzzled but assured me they would continue searching. They advised me to stay in a safe place and to contact them if I had any more information. As I left the lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The message and the shadowy figure had left an indelible mark on my mind. I went home, trying to make sense of what had happened, but the unease remained. Days passed and my car was never recovered. The police investigation turned up no leads, and the message remained a chilling enigma. I couldn't stop thinking about the figure and the cryptic warning. It was as if someone or something was still out there, lurking in the shadows, watching me. The incident had changed me. I found myself wary of secluded places and reluctant to venture out alone. The message left in the dust was a constant reminder that there was more to the world than met the eye, and that sometimes staying inside was the safest option of all. Story 15. The sun was setting behind the hills, casting a golden hue over the quiet neighborhood. I was in my backyard, trimming the overgrown hedge, when I stumbled upon something strange half buried in the dirt. At first, I thought it was a discarded toy or an old piece of metal, but as I cleared away the soil, I realized it was a dog's collar. It was a simple, silver metal tag attached to a red leather strap, worn with age but still sturdy. The tag had the name Max engraved on it, along with a phone number. I brushed off the dirt and held it up to the fading light, noticing how the leather had cracked and the metal was tarnished. It seemed like it had been there for quite some time. Curious and slightly concerned, I decided to return the collar to its owner. I knew my neighbor, Mr. Thompson, had a dog named Max. He had mentioned losing his dog a few weeks ago, and the entire neighborhood had been on the lookout since then. I hoped this collar might bring some closure to the search. I walked across the street and up to Mr. Thompson's porch. He was a quiet, elderly man who kept to himself, but I knew he'd appreciate the gesture. I rang the doorbell and waited. After a moment, Mr. Thompson answered, his face breaking into a tired but hopeful smile. "Good evening, Mr. Thompson. "I found this in my backyard," I said, holding out the collar. His smile faltered as he took the collar into his trembling hands. He turned it over, examining it closely. His face turned an ashen color, and he swallowed hard. This collar hasn't been seen for years," he stammered. I was taken aback. "But you said you lost Max recently. This collar has your dog's name on it." Mr. Thompson's gaze was distant, as if he were looking through me rather than at me. "Max went missing a few weeks ago, but this collar, it disappeared years ago. I haven't seen it since he trailed off," shaking his head. "Something doesn't add up." "Are you sure?" I asked, puzzled. Maybe it just got misplaced and turned up now. Mr. Thompson's eyes were filled with a mix of confusion and fear. I remember clearly. It was the same collar I bought for him when he was a pup. I lost it during the renovation of the house. That was 5 years ago. We both fell silent. The air seemed to thicken, as if the shadows were closing in on us. Mr. Thompson looked troubled, his hands clutching the collar tightly. "Do you think someone might have found it and put it in my yard?" I ventured, trying to make sense of the situation. "It's possible," Mr. Thompson replied, his voice barely a whisper. "But it's strange, very strange." I offered to help Mr. Thompson look around his yard, thinking that perhaps there was some clue as to how the collar ended up in my backyard. He reluctantly agreed, and we started combing through the area, but found nothing out of the ordinary. As we finished up, Mr. Thompson took a deep breath. "There's something I haven't told you. When Max went missing, I had a strange encounter with a man who claimed to have seen Max. He was oddly insistent and gave me directions to a place I didn't recognize. I didn't follow up on it because it seemed too outlandish. Maybe this man was connected to the collar somehow," I suggested, trying to piece together the puzzle. "It's possible," Mr. Thompson said, "but the man never seemed quite right. His eyes were unsettling. It felt like he knew more than he was letting on." That night, as I sat in my living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I found myself thinking about the collar and Mr. Thompson's strange reaction. The mystery of how the collar ended up in my yard and the cryptic nature of the man Mr. Thompson had encountered kept me awake. The next day, I decided to investigate further. I visited the neighborhood and spoke with a few locals, hoping to find some information about the strange man Mr. Thompson had mentioned. Most people remembered him as an unusual figure who had been seen around the area a few times but didn't know much more. I followed up on a tip that led me to an old warehouse at the edge of town. It was run down and abandoned, but I felt a strange compulsion to check it out. The warehouse was filled with dusty relics and forgotten items. As I searched, I found something that made my blood run cold: a collection of old dog collars, including one that looked eerily similar to Max's. My heart raced as I realized the implications. These collars were not just relics, they were connected to missing pets. The collection seemed to suggest that something sinister had been happening in the area for years, and Max's collar had been part of it. I returned to Mr. Thompson with my findings, my hands trembling. His face went pale as he looked at the collection of collars. This is horrifying," he said, his voice shaking. "I never imagined something like this." Together, we reported the findings to the authorities, and an investigation was launched. It turned out that the warehouse had been used by a man with a history of strange behavior, who was now being questioned about his involvement in the disappearance of pets in the area. As for Max, the search continued with renewed hope. Though the mystery of the collar was unsettling, it had led to a crucial discovery. The case brought to light a dark undercurrent in the community, and with the help of the authorities, we hoped to uncover the full truth and bring closure to those affected. For now, as I looked out into the quiet neighborhood, I felt a sense of uneasy relief. The collar had revealed more than just the story of a missing dog. It had exposed a hidden danger, and a truth that needed to be faced. Story 16. It was a particularly ordinary Wednesday evening when the first message arrived. I was lounging on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when a notification popped up. The sender was an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it, a mild curiosity piquing my interest. The message read, "I hope you're enjoying the coffee you spilled this morning." My heart skipped a beat. I had, in fact, spilled coffee that morning. It wasn't something I'd mentioned to anyone. My mind raced. Who was this, and how did they know about my clumsy mishap? I tried to dismiss it as a prank, a wrong number, or maybe even an old friend playing a joke. But when the second message came through a few minutes later, my unease grew. "Looks like you were running late for work today. Traffic must have been a nightmare." I froze. The message was accurate. My morning had been rushed due to heavy traffic. I hadn't mentioned this to anyone. The feeling of being observed settled over me like a cold shroud. I glanced around my apartment, checking for any signs of tampering or intrusion, but found nothing unusual. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, though I had no idea how or why. I didn't respond to the messages, hoping that would be the end of it. But the next day, the messages continued. Each text seemed to describe a moment from my day in eerie detail. "Nice choice of lunch today. The sandwich from the deli looked delicious." I had indeed gone to that particular deli, but I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. My unease turned to genuine fear. I considered calling the police, but was hesitant. What could I tell them? That I was receiving messages from an unknown number detailing my day's events. It sounded absurd. The next few days were a blur of anxiety. The texts continued, detailing my activities with alarming precision. They knew about my visit to the grocery store, my evening jog through the park, and even the brief conversation I'd had with my neighbor. Each message felt like a personal invasion, a cruel reminder that someone was tracking my every move. The messages grew more unsettling. One night, after I'd locked up and turned off all the lights, I received a new text. "Good night. I hope you sleep well." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. I was alone in my apartment, and the thought that someone knew my routine so intimately made me feel vulnerable and exposed. I checked the locks on my windows and doors again, though I knew deep down that they wouldn't protect me from an unseen observer. The situation escalated quickly. One evening, while I was preparing dinner, I received a message that sent shivers down my spine. "Your meal smells great. Enjoying it alone tonight." I dropped the phone, my mind spinning. I felt the walls of my apartment close in on me, the oppressive feeling of being watched intensifying. I looked out of the window, but the street outside was empty and dark. I tried to convince myself that it was just a cruel joke, but deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind felt like a threat. I kept my phone close, watching for any new messages, but none came. The silence was almost as unsettling as the constant stream of texts had been. The next day, the final message arrived. It was sent in the early hours of the morning, just as the sun began to rise. "I'm outside your window." My blood ran cold. I bolted out of bed and rushed to the window, throwing open the curtains. The street was empty, but the fear gnawed at me. I felt trapped in my own home, unsure of where to turn or whom to trust. I called the police, my voice trembling as I described the situation. Officers arrived promptly and conducted a search of the area, but found no signs of anyone outside. They checked my apartment for security, but everything seemed secure and undisturbed. They reassured me that there was no immediate threat, but their words offered little comfort. As the days passed, the messages stopped coming, but the sense of unease lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow, every unexplained noise made me jump. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, unable to escape the lingering fear of the unknown. I took steps to protect myself, installing security cameras, reinforcing the locks, and even moving my furniture to block potential hiding spots. But the paranoia remained. I avoided being alone whenever possible, always glancing over my shoulder, always wondering if someone was watching. The experience left me with a lasting sense of vulnerability. I had been exposed to an invasive presence that knew my life in frightening detail. Despite the efforts to reclaim my sense of safety, the fear never fully dissipated. The mystery of the messages remained unsolved, a chilling reminder that someone had once invaded the privacy of my life in a way that words could barely describe. In the end, the messages stopped, but the haunting awareness of that unknown presence stayed with me. I had learned to live with a constant undercurrent of caution, forever changed by the unsettling experience of being watched and taunted by a faceless, omniscient stranger. Story 17. The attic had always been a place of curiosity and dust-covered memories, a realm I seldom ventured into. As a child, I would peer up the narrow staircase that led to its shadowy confines, imagining it as a secret world full of forgotten treasures. Years had passed since I last explored that space, but a sudden wave of nostalgia and an impending sense of curiosity drove me to finally venture up there again. It was on a rainy Saturday afternoon when I decided to tackle the attic. The sky outside was overcast, casting a gray pallor over everything, making it the perfect day for rediscovering old family relics. I retrieved the key from its usual spot and climbed the creaky wooden stairs, each step echoing in the silence of the house. The attic was, as I remembered, dimly lit by a single, flickering bulb that hung from the ceiling. The space was cluttered with old furniture, dusty trunks, and boxes piled haphazardly. The smell of aged paper and mothballs filled the air, mingling with the musty scent of old wood. I set to work, methodically sifting through the clutter, opening trunks and examining their contents. It was in a corner of the attic, partially obscured by an old, moth-eaten quilt, that I found a small, leather-bound diary. Its cover was cracked and worn, the edges frayed, and it was tied with a faded ribbon. I gently lifted it out, careful not to disturb the surrounding dust, and brushed off the grime before opening it. The diary's pages were yellowed with age, and the handwriting was elegant but slightly faded. The entries began innocuously enough, with descriptions of daily life and mundane events. I soon realized, to my amazement, that the diary chronicled not just the past, but the present day as well. It contained entries about my family and me, written in real time, detailing events that I recognized as part of my own life. The entries were fascinating, written with a mix of warmth and keen observation. They described family gatherings, personal milestones, and the little idiosyncrasies that made each of us unique. There were mentions of family dinners, summer vacations, and even small, personal moments that I had long forgotten. Each entry was a window into the past, offering a glimpse of how things were viewed from the perspective of this mysterious writer. As I turned the pages, a sense of unease began to settle over me. The entries were meticulously detailed, capturing moments with a level of precision that seemed almost too intimate. It was as if the writer was not just an observer but a participant, someone who had been incredibly close to us. Then I reached the final entry, dated just a few days ago. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words scrawled in hurried, almost frantic script. I'm in the attic. A chill ran down my spine, and I looked around the attic, my heart pounding in my chest. The mundane clutter seemed suddenly menacing, the shadows cast by the dim light taking on a more sinister tone. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the chilling entry. Who had written this diary, and why had they been in the attic? I glanced around, my eyes scanning every corner of the attic for any sign of movement or disturbance. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional drip of rain from the roof. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and began to search the attic more thoroughly. I moved cautiously, pulling aside boxes and examining every nook and cranny. I even checked the old trunks, hoping to find some clue or explanation. As I searched, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, a sensation that only heightened my anxiety. After what felt like hours, I found nothing out of the ordinary, no hidden compartments, no signs of recent activity. The attic seemed as unchanged as it had been when I first arrived. Yet the eerie feeling persisted, a constant reminder of the unsettling entry in the diary. Just as I was about to give up and head back downstairs, I noticed something peculiar. In the far corner of the attic, partially obscured by a pile of old blankets, was a small, ornate box. I hadn't seen it before, and its presence seemed out of place amidst the clutter. I approached the box with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. It was intricately carved, its surface covered in delicate patterns. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, revealing an assortment of old photographs and letters. Among them was a small, silver locket, its surface engraved with the initials of my family members. As I examined the contents, I came across a faded photograph of a woman standing in front of our house. Her face was partially obscured, but there was something familiar about her. I couldn't quite place it, but the photograph seemed to have an air of significance. Suddenly, the bulb above me flickered and went out, plunging the attic into darkness. My heart raced and I fumbled for the flashlight in my bag. When I turned it on, the beam of light revealed a shadowy figure standing in the far corner of the attic. The figure was indistinct, almost transparent, and seemed to blend into the surroundings. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backward, knocking over a box in my haste. The figure remained motionless, watching me with an unsettling stillness. I felt an overwhelming urge to leave, to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the attic. I scrambled down the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the quiet house. Once I reached the safety of the ground floor, I took a moment to catch my breath. The diary and the box were still up there, but I knew I needed to leave the attic behind, at least for the time being. The next day, I decided to consult an expert on old family records and historical research. I needed answers, and I hoped they could provide some insight into the mysterious diary and its writer. As I left the house, the rain had stopped, and the clouds were beginning to clear. Despite the daylight, the unsettling feeling lingered, a constant reminder of the secrets that still lay hidden in the attic. The diary remained a haunting enigma, a relic of the past that left me with more questions than answers. The final entry, "I'm in the attic," echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder that sometimes the past has a way of reaching out and touching the present in ways we can scarcely understand. Story 18. I woke up with a start, my heart racing as I tried to make sense of my surroundings. I was in a sterile hospital room, the kind with white walls and a constant beeping sound from the monitors. The faint smell of antiseptic stung my nostrils. Disoriented, I glanced around, trying to piece together how I had ended up here. The last thing I remembered was driving home late at night, but everything after that was a blank. A nurse walked in, her cheerful demeanor a stark contrast to the confusion swirling in my mind. She checked the monitors and then turned her attention to me. "Good morning. How are we feeling today?" I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the fog from my memory. "I don't understand. How did I get here?" The nurse's smile faltered for a moment. "You were admitted last night. You've been unconscious for a while. We were starting to get worried about you." "Last night," I echoed. "But I don't remember coming here. What's today's date?" The nurse glanced at the chart at the foot of my bed and paused before answering. "It's August 15th. I frowned, trying to make sense of the information. But the last thing I remember was, It was months ago. How could it be August now? She seemed to sense my growing distress. Let me check your records. Maybe there's been a mistake. She left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I looked around, trying to find something familiar, anything that could help me understand what was happening. That's when I noticed a photo on a small table in the corner of the room. My blood ran cold as I realized it was a picture of me. In the photo, I looked terrified, my eyes wide and my face pale, as if I had seen something truly horrifying. The image was clearly recent given the state of my clothes, but it was a stark contrast to the peaceful expression I would have expected if I had been admitted voluntarily. My mind raced. What had happened to me? Why was I here? And why did this photo make me feel like something terrible was about to unfold? The nurse returned, holding a folder. I'm sorry, there seems to be some confusion. According to your chart, you were admitted 3 months ago. We've been keeping you under observation since then due to some unusual symptoms. Unusual symptoms, I repeated, trying to recall any signs or symptoms I might have had before losing my memory. What kind of symptoms? The nurse hesitated. I'm afraid I can't go into details. You'll need to speak with the doctor about that. I'm just here to make sure you're comfortable and to provide updates. I nodded, feeling a growing sense of unease. Can I see the doctor now? The nurse nodded and left the room to fetch him. As I waited, I glanced at the photo again, trying to decipher what it meant. Was it a clue to something I had forgotten, or a warning of something to come? When the doctor finally arrived, he was an older man with a kind but tired face. He introduced himself and began reviewing my chart. I understand you're feeling confused. It's quite normal after being unconscious for an extended period. Yes, I said, my voice trembling slightly. But why was I admitted so long ago? And what happened to me? The doctor sighed. You experienced a severe episode of dissociation, which is a psychological condition where a person loses touch with reality. It's often triggered by extreme stress or trauma. When you were admitted, you were in a state of severe anxiety, and your memory of the events leading up to it was completely wiped. Dissociation, I repeated, trying to grasp the term. So I lost my memory because of stress. What kind of stress? We're not entirely sure, the doctor admitted. We found evidence of significant distress, but no clear cause. You were very distressed when you were admitted, and you've been under observation to ensure your safety. As the doctor spoke, I noticed something odd in his expression, a flicker of unease that he quickly masked. Is there something you're not telling me? I asked. The doctor hesitated. There are some inconsistencies in your case that we haven't been able to explain. For example, the photo you saw. The photo, I interrupted. What about it? It's unusual, the doctor said carefully. It was found in your belongings when you were admitted. We don't know who took it or why it was included. We've been trying to piece together what happened, but there are gaps in the information. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why wouldn't you tell me everything? The doctor looked uncomfortable. I can't give you all the details right now. There are protocols and procedures we need to follow. I suggest you try to relax and focus on your recovery. We're here to help you. As the doctor left, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The photo haunted me. Its image burned into my mind. Who had taken it, and why did I look so terrified? What had I been through that was so traumatic it erased my memory? In the days that followed, I tried to piece together my fragmented memories, but nothing came together. The days blended into one another as I underwent tests and therapy, each session leaving me more frustrated and anxious. The photo remained a constant reminder of the unknown, a symbol of a mystery I couldn't solve. Every time I looked at that photo, I wondered if the real terror was still to come. What had happened to me, and was it something that could come back to haunt me? The sense of dread never left me, and as I lay in my hospital bed each night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the scariest part of my ordeal was yet to unfold. Story 19. It was an ordinary Wednesday evening when I received the first of several invitations to an event at my own house. The envelope was simple, addressed to me in an elegant script. Inside, the invitation read, "You are cordially invited to an evening of celebration on Wednesday, August 7th at 7 p.m. We look forward to seeing you there." At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe a neighbor had accidentally used my address, or it was some sort of prank. I checked my calendar. No parties or gatherings were scheduled. I didn't remember planning anything, nor did I know anyone who would organize an event without telling me. My curiosity was piqued, but I decided to dismiss it as a harmless mix-up. As the evening approached, a nagging sense of unease grew. I debated whether to just ignore it or to see what was going on. Finally, curiosity won over caution. I decided to go home and check it out, hoping it was just a misunderstanding. I arrived at my house at precisely 7 p.m., my nerves tingling with anticipation. To my astonishment, the driveway was lined with cars, and there were people milling about on my front lawn. Music drifted out from the open door, an unfamiliar tune that didn't match the kind of music I usually listened to. I took a deep breath and walked up to the door. As I pushed it open, the noise of the party hit me like a wave. The living room was filled with people, all dressed in formal attire, chatting and laughing as if they had been there for hours. The room was decorated with balloons, streamers, and fairy lights, none of which I had put up myself. The strangest part was that everyone stopped talking and turned to stare at me as I entered. The room fell silent, and all eyes were on me. The guests were a mix of well-dressed men and women, their expressions a curious blend of amusement and expectation. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I cleared my throat, trying to break the silence. "Excuse me," I said, my voice wavering slightly. "I think there's been a mistake. I didn't organize this party." One of the guests, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard, approached me with a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ah, you must be the host. We've been waiting for you." "Oh, host," I echoed, bewildered. "I'm not the host. I don't even know what's going on." The man's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Please make yourself comfortable. It's your party, after all." Before I could respond, the guests resumed their conversations, though their eyes occasionally flicked toward me. I felt like an intruder in my own home, a guest in a place that should have been familiar. I wandered through the rooms, trying to find any clues about who might have organized this event. The dining room was set with an elaborate spread of food, none of which I recognized. There were trays of gourmet hors d'oeuvres, and a large, beautifully decorated cake sat in the center of the table. The kitchen was bustling with activity. Waiters in uniforms moved in and out, carrying trays of drinks and dishes. I approached the kitchen, hoping to find someone who could shed light on this bizarre situation. One of the waiters, a young woman with a polite smile, handed me a glass of champagne. "Welcome. We're so glad you could join us." I took the glass, though I had no intention of drinking it. "Thank you, but I'm afraid I'm really not sure what's happening. Who organized this party?" The woman's smile grew a bit strained. "I'm sorry I can't give you any details, but I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Everyone's been looking forward to your arrival." I tried to probe further, but she politely excused herself and went back to her duties. I felt increasingly frustrated and out of place. It was clear that no one was going to give me a straight answer. The guests continued to enjoy themselves, seemingly unfazed by my confusion. I decided to take a seat in the living room, hoping that if I waited long enough, someone would explain what was going on. As I sat there trying to blend in, I overheard snippets of conversation. "Have you met the host yet? Can you believe it's finally happening?" I heard they were very particular about the details. Each comment only deepened my sense of unease. It was as if the party was meant to be a grand event, but I was excluded from its significance. The guest conversations were punctuated with occasional glances in my direction, as though I was the subject of their discussion. After what felt like hours, a woman dressed in an elegant evening gown approached me. Her demeanor was calm and authoritative. "I'm so sorry for the confusion," she said, her voice soothing. "I'm the event coordinator. It appears there was a mix-up with the invitations. We weren't expecting you to arrive." I felt a surge of relief mixed with frustration. "So, you're telling me this was supposed to be a surprise party for someone else?" "Yes," she replied, her tone apologetic. "It was intended to be a surprise for a client who's been eagerly awaiting this celebration. Unfortunately, there was an error in the address, and it was mistakenly sent to you." I shook my head in disbelief. "But why didn't anyone tell me sooner? I've been here all evening, feeling like a stranger in my own home." The coordinator's expression softened. "I understand how unsettling this must be. We'll make sure to clear everything up and have the guests leave as soon as possible. We sincerely apologize for the intrusion." As the evening wound down, the guests began to leave, their faces filled with polite smiles and apologies. The decorations were taken down, and the food was packed away. By the time the last guest had departed, my home was once again quiet and still. I stood in the middle of my living room, the remnants of the party strewn about, and let out a deep sigh. The unsettling experience had left me shaken, and I couldn't help but feel that this strange event had left a mark on my sense of normalcy. As I began to clean up, I resolved to be more cautious about unexpected invitations in the future. For now, I was just grateful to have my home back to myself, free of unwanted surprises. Story 20. When I first moved into my new apartment, everything seemed perfect. It was a quaint, two-bedroom unit in an old building that had been recently renovated. The original details had been preserved: exposed brick walls, high ceilings, and large vintage windows. The apartment had character, and it felt like a fresh start. The bathroom was a charming little space with white subway tiles and a clawfoot tub. It was one of my favorite features of the apartment, a nostalgic nod to a bygone era. I was still unpacking when I noticed something odd: a large mirror hanging above the sink. It wasn't anything special, just an old framed mirror with a slight crack in the glass. I figured it had been there since the building's renovation and decided to leave it for now. Days turned into weeks, and I settled into my new home. My routine became familiar, and the apartment felt increasingly like my own. But as I started to feel more comfortable, I began to notice something strange. Every now and then, when I would pass by the bathroom, I would catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, something that seemed to move in the mirror's reflection. I tried to ignore it, attributing it to the stress of moving and adjusting to a new place, but the unease persisted. I would catch fleeting glimpses of shadows in the mirror that seemed to defy the lighting and the actual layout of the room. It was as if something was lurking just beyond the surface, watching me. One evening, while I was brushing my teeth, I noticed something different. The mirror's crack had deepened, forming an intricate pattern across the glass. The shape of the crack resembled a jagged spider's web, and I felt an inexplicable chill run down my spine. The cracks seemed to shimmer in the dim light, creating unsettling reflections that danced across the room. I decided it was time to replace the mirror. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with it. I went to a local store and picked out a new modern mirror with a clean, simple frame. It was sleek and unassuming, a stark contrast to the old, cracked one in my bathroom. The next day I took down the old mirror and carefully removed it from the wall. As I set it down on the floor, something caught my eye. At the base of the mirror, on the back, was a message scratched into the wood: "You'll never leave." My heart pounded as I read the words. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. The message was clear, and it was disturbing. I couldn't imagine who would have written it or why. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. It was probably just a prank or a joke left by a previous tenant. I had no reason to believe it was anything more than that. With trembling hands, I covered the old mirror with a sheet and carried it out to the trash. I installed the new mirror and tried to put the unsettling discovery out of my mind. I hoped that replacing the mirror would somehow lift the strange feeling that had settled over the apartment. But that night, as I lay in bed, I found it difficult to sleep. My thoughts kept drifting back to the message on the old mirror. What if it wasn't just a prank? What if there was something more sinister behind it? Around midnight, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from the bathroom. My heart raced as I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. It sounded like someone was trying to claw their way out of the bathroom. Summoning my courage, I got up and walked slowly toward the bathroom. The sound stopped abruptly as I approached, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I hesitated at the door, then pushed it open. The bathroom was exactly as I had left it. The new mirror reflected back my anxious face, and everything seemed normal. I checked every corner of the room, but there was no sign of anything out of the ordinary. I tried to reassure myself that the sound must have been my imagination, a figment of my overactive mind. The next few nights were a blur of restless sleep and uneasy dreams. I kept hearing faint noises coming from the bathroom, but whenever I checked, everything seemed perfectly normal. I started avoiding the bathroom as much as possible, not wanting to be alone with the strange sensations that plagued me. One evening, as I was preparing for bed, I heard a sudden crash from the bathroom. My heart nearly stopped as I rushed to the door. When I opened it, I found that the new mirror had fallen from the wall and shattered on the floor. The shards were scattered everywhere, glistening menacingly in the dim light. I picked up the largest pieces, trying to ignore the creeping sense of dread that had become a constant companion. As I cleaned up the mess, I saw something inscribed on one of the shards, barely visible, but unmistakable: "You'll never leave." The message was still there, etched into the glass, and it was more terrifying than ever. I had no explanation for it. I felt trapped, like the apartment was holding me captive with its sinister secret.